I set a fresh pot of tea on the table and placed a small blue folder beside Julian's breakfast plate. It wasn't a legal notice or anything dramatic. It was simply a detailed list of the household expenses: electricity, water, internet, maintenance, and groceries. Everything was carefully calculated and divided fairly based on how much space each of us used. Julian looked up, confused. "What's this?" he asked. I folded my hands calmly. "Since you've both been living upstairs for 6 months, it's time we start sharing the household costs fairly. Beginning next month, you'll contribute your portion." Chloe nearly choked on her coffee. "What?" she snapped. "We've never had to pay before." I nodded. "That's true. I wanted to help you get settled and save some money, but things have changed." The room fell silent. Julian slowly flipped through the pages. The numbers were reasonable. There was nothing unfair about them. Chloe frowned. "So now you're charging us rent?" "No," I replied evenly. "I'm asking you to contribute to the expenses you create. There's a difference." She crossed her arms. "This feels like punishment." I met her eyes. "It isn't punishment. It's responsibility." For once, Chloe had no quick comeback. Julian cleared his throat. "Mom, maybe we should talk about this later." "We can," I said. "But the decision has already been made." The conversation ended there. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house changed noticeably. Chloe stopped criticizing my cooking. She stopped making comments about my garden. She even started cleaning up after herself instead of leaving dishes in the sink for me to handle. But I knew this wasn't because she suddenly respected me. She was angry, very angry. A week later, I came home from grocery shopping and found Chloe in the living room speaking on the phone. She didn't realize I had entered. "I can't believe her," she complained loudly. "She's acting like some kind of landlord now." I quietly set my down. Then I heard the voice coming from the phone. It was Maeve, and she did not sound pleased. "Chloe," her mother said firmly, "your mother-in-law has supported you for 6 months. You owe her gratitude, not complaints." Chloe's face turned pale when she noticed me standing in the doorway. Maeve continued speaking. "You embarrassed yourself at dinner. Instead of learning from it, you're still acting like the victim." The call ended a few moments later. Chloe walked upstairs without saying another word. For the first time since she moved in, she looked uncertain. That evening, Julian knocked on my door. "Mom," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." I looked up from my book. He sat down across from me. "I should have stepped in months ago. I saw what was happening, and I kept avoiding it." I appreciated his honesty. "Why now?" I asked. Julian lowered his eyes. "Because I'm finally realizing how much you've done for us." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed. "We're going to start looking for our own place." I nodded. I had expected that. And honestly, it was the best solution for everyone. 3 months later, they moved out. There was no dramatic argument, no shouting, no revenge, just consequences. The day they left, Chloe approached me awkwardly. "I know things haven't been great between us," she said. I waited. She looked down at her hands. "I'm sorry." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was the first genuine one I had ever heard from her. I smiled politely. "Thank you." As their car pulled away from the driveway, I stood on the front porch and watched them leave. The house felt quiet again, peaceful. For the first time in months, it truly felt like my home. And sometimes that's the best revenge of all. Not hurting someone back, but calmly reminding them where the boundaries are and refusing to let them be crossed. Chloe stopped what she was doing and slowly turned around. "We thought helping around the house was our way of contributing instead of paying rent," she said, her voice sharp and defensive. I remained calm. "I don't need help with vacuuming or taking out the trash," I replied. "What I need is reliability. The monthly payment needs to arrive in my account by the 5th of every month." Julian shifted uncomfortably. "Come on, Mom," he said. "We're family. Do we really need to make this so formal?" I looked at my son. The boy I had raised with love and patience now seemed afraid to stand up for anything. "That's exactly why we need clear rules, Julian," I said. "Good boundaries keep families together. When expectations are clear, resentment doesn't build up." The room grew quiet. "If these arrangements don't work for you," I continued, "then maybe it's time to consider other living arrangements." The word "other" lingered in the air. It wasn't meant as a threat. It was simply the truth. Chloe pressed her lips together. She was used to getting her way through silence, guilt, and cold behavior. But those tactics didn't work on me anymore. Without another word, she grabbed her purse, pulled Julian toward the door, and stormed out. The front door slammed behind them. For the first time in months, I didn't feel stressed. I felt relieved. I walked to the hallway and removed the spare key to the upstairs apartment from the key rack. They deserved their privacy, and I deserved my boundaries. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was outside trimming the roses. It was Maeve. Her voice sounded tired and full of regret. "Harriet," she began. "I can't stop thinking about what happened. The way Chloe behaved, that's not how we raised her." I listened quietly. "She's changed so much since she got that corporate management job," Maeve continued. "Everything seems to be about status, money, and appearances now." I carefully clipped another rose stem. "Maeve, you don't have to apologize for your daughter," I said gently. "She's an adult. She's responsible for her own choices." Maeve sighed. "Arthur and I spoke to her yesterday. We told her her behavior was completely unacceptable, but she refused to listen. She's furious that you're asking them to contribute financially." I looked toward the upstairs windows. "It's not really about the money," I said. "What is it about then?" Maeve asked. "It's about respect." I paused. "When someone lives in my home, benefits from my generosity, and then treats me like I don't matter, there have to be consequences." Maeve immediately agreed. "You're right," she said. "And honestly, Arthur and I have made a decision." I waited. "We've been helping Chloe financially for years," Maeve admitted. "We were secretly sending money every month to help cover the payments on her luxury car. That surprised me," Maeve continued. "Well, that's over now. If she wants expensive things, she can pay for them herself." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I smiled quietly. Not because Chloe was losing financial support, but because, for the first time, everyone around her was refusing to excuse her behavior. The safety nets were disappearing, and sooner or later, she would have to face the consequences of her own choices. "She needs to learn the value of hard work and humility," Maeve said before ending the call. We hung up on good terms. Chloe had always first believed her parents would take her side no matter what, but she had badly underestimated their honesty and sense of right and wrong. As I slipped my phone into my pocket, I noticed Julian's car pulling into the driveway. He got out alone. The tired look on his face said everything. The lines had been drawn, and everyone knew it. The following Saturday, I made another small change. For years, family grocery shopping had been my responsibility. Somehow, I always ended up paying for everything. Not this time. I woke up early, enjoyed a peaceful cup of coffee, and left the house before anyone else was awake. 2 hours later, I returned with my groceries. I carefully stocked the upstairs refrigerator with food I had bought for myself. Everything was neatly arranged and clearly labeled. As I finished putting things away, Chloe appeared in the hallway. She looked irritated before she even spoke. "Where are the bagels?" she asked. "And the cold cuts?" I hung my jacket by the door. "In my refrigerator," I answered calmly. She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means that starting today, each floor handles its own groceries and meals," I explained. "You have a fully equipped kitchenette upstairs. There's really no reason for us to keep mixing our food and expenses together." Chloe stopped walking. Her expression hardened. "This is ridiculous, Harriet," she snapped. "We live in the same house." "Exactly," I replied. "We share the same roof. But that doesn't mean I have to continue paying for everyone else's lifestyle." She stared at me, clearly expecting an argument. Instead, she found calm certainty. For a moment, she had nothing to say. Just then, Julian shuffled downstairs, looking half asleep. His hair was a mess, and he rubbed his eyes. "What's going on?" he asked. "Your mother is dividing up the food now," Chloe complained. Julian looked from her to me. I could see him thinking. He remembered the disastrous dinner. He remembered the conversations with Maeve and Arthur. He remembered every uncomfortable moment that had followed. Most importantly, he could see that I wasn't changing my mind. After a long pause, he simply nodded. Without arguing, he walked toward the basement storage room. A few minutes later, I heard him carrying up an old coffee maker. If they were going to manage their own groceries, they would need their own coffee too. Chloe let out an annoyed sigh and followed him upstairs. I watched them go and quietly smiled to myself. It wasn't about punishment. It wasn't even about money. It was about independence. For too long, I had been carrying responsibilities that weren't mine. Now everyone was learning where those responsibilities truly belonged. And for the first time in a very long while, my home felt peaceful. The boundaries were clear. The expectations were clear. And slowly, the balance of the household was changing. Over the next several days, I stayed consistent. I wasn't looking for arguments or trying to make anyone uncomfortable. I was simply protecting my space and maintaining the boundaries I had put in place. One of the first things I did was change the lock on the door that connected my living area to the upstairs apartment. It wasn't meant to be hostile. It was simply the next logical step in our new arrangement. On Tuesday afternoon, Chloe discovered the change. As usual, she tried to walk through the connecting door to use my laundry room. The handle wouldn't turn. A few seconds later, loud knocking echoed through the hallway. I opened the door slightly. "The washer and dryer are available for you on Saturdays from 8 in the morning until noon," I said politely. "During the week, I need the space for my own use." Chloe stared at me. Her expression quickly hardened. "You're only doing this because I criticized your cooking," she said through clenched teeth. I remained calm. "No, Chloe. I'm doing this because you've repeatedly shown that you don't respect my home, my property, or my boundaries." She crossed her arms. I continued. "Most people learn to ask permission before entering someone else's personal space." The moment I mentioned respect, her face tightened. She knew exactly what I meant, and she knew her parents agreed with me. Behind her, Julian stood on the staircase looking uncomfortable. Finally, he spoke. "It's her house, Chloe." His voice was quiet, but I heard it. So did she. For a moment, Chloe looked shocked. It was the first time Julian had openly disagreed with her. Without another word, she spun around and stormed upstairs. A second later, their apartment door slammed shut. The walls shook. I calmly closed my door and locked it. The solid click of the deadbolt sounded surprisingly peaceful. A few days later, Maeve and Arthur invited all of us to meet for coffee. They intentionally chose a small cafe instead of my house, neutral ground. When Chloe arrived, she looked confident, almost smug. It was obvious she believed her parents had arranged the meeting to support her side of the story. She couldn't have been more wrong. Once everyone had their drinks, Arthur leaned forward. His expression was serious. "Chloe," he began, "we asked you here because we need to discuss your behavior." The smile disappeared from her face. Arthur continued. "The way you treated Harriet at that family dinner was unacceptable. It was disrespectful, rude, and embarrassing." Immediately, Chloe became defensive. "Oh, come on, Dad. Everyone is acting like it's some huge issue. She's controlling everything now and locking us out of parts of the house." Enough. Maeve's sharp interruption surprised everyone at the table. Even Chloe looked stunned. "Harriet has every right to manage her home however she chooses," Maeve said firmly. "You lived under her roof, benefited from her generosity, and then insulted her in front of your entire family." The cafe became very quiet. Then Maeve delivered the news. "Your father and I have made a decision. We are ending all financial support." Chloe blinked. "What?" "No more assistance," Arthur said. "No more money toward your car payments or lifestyle expenses." "You can't be serious," Chloe whispered. "We are serious," Maeve replied. "If you're old enough to criticize others and demand respect, you're old enough to support yourself." For the first time since all of this began, Chloe looked genuinely shaken. She turned toward Julian, expecting him to defend her. Instead, he stared down at his coffee, silent, thoughtful. Maybe for the first time, he was beginning to understand how much damage had been caused. I sat quietly and sipped my tea. There was nothing left for me to say. The truth was already sitting at the table. The consequences of Chloe's actions were speaking for themselves. No arguments, no revenge schemes, no dramatic confrontations, just accountability. And judging by the look on Chloe's face, losing the financial safety net she had always relied on hit harder than anything I could have said myself. Without her parents' financial support, Chloe could no longer maintain the expensive lifestyle she was used to. Now she had household bills to pay, and for the first time, money was becoming a real concern. The change was noticeable. The upstairs apartment grew much quieter. The loud music stopped. The constant stomping and passive-aggressive behavior disappeared. Reality finally started catching up with her. One evening, there was a gentle knock at my front door. When I opened it, I found Julian standing there with an envelope in his hand. "Here's our share of the utilities, Mom," he said quietly. "Right on time." I smiled and accepted it. "Thank you, Julian. I appreciate that." He nodded, but didn't leave immediately. Instead, he glanced into my peaceful living room. The room felt warm and calm, something that seemed to be missing upstairs these days. "It's pretty tense up there," he admitted. I waited. "Chloe talks about money all the time now," he continued, "and her parents won't even answer her calls until she gives you a sincere apology." I could see how tired he looked. The stress was written all over his face. "Julian," I said gently, "you're a grown man. At some point, you have to decide what kind of values you want to live by." He lowered his eyes. "I know, Mom, I've been weak." The honesty surprised me. I kept avoiding conflict because I didn't want to fight. I nodded. "But avoiding problems doesn't make them disappear. It usually gives them more room to grow." He sighed. "I think I'm finally understanding that." Before leaving, he gave me a hug. It felt different from the quick, distant hugs we'd shared over the past several months. This one felt genuine. As he headed back upstairs, I had a feeling that something important was beginning to change. The balance of power in the house had shifted, and there was no going back. The real breaking point arrived a week later, on a cold, rainy Thursday afternoon. I was setting the table for dinner when I heard a car pull into the driveway. Looking through the window, I saw Maeve and Arthur getting out. A few months earlier, their visits had been filled with warmth and family conversations. This visit felt different, purposeful. They went straight upstairs. A few minutes later, raised voices drifted down through the ceiling. No one was screaming, but it was obvious a serious conversation was taking place. I could hear Chloe trying to defend herself, trying to explain, trying to shift the blame. Then Arthur's voice cut through the noise. Firm, unwavering. "Stop blaming everyone else, Chloe. You've treated people badly, and now you're facing the consequences of your choices." The house fell silent for a moment. Then more arguing followed. Eventually, heavy footsteps rushed down the stairs. The front door flew open. Chloe stormed out into the pouring rain without looking back. A few seconds later, Julian followed, looking shaken and emotionally drained. The door closed behind them. Soon afterward, Maeve and Arthur came downstairs. They looked heartbroken, but they also looked certain. Arthur folded his arms. "We gave her an ultimatum," he said. I listened quietly. "She either takes responsibility for her behavior and makes real changes, or we're stepping away completely." Maeve nodded. "We love our daughter, Harriet, but love doesn't mean excusing bad behavior." There was sadness in her eyes, a lot of sadness, but there was also strength. "And Julian knows exactly where we stand," Arthur added. I thanked both of them, not because they had taken my side, but because they had chosen honesty over convenience. Many parents would have ignored the problem. They didn't. They were willing to hold their daughter accountable, even when it hurt. As they prepared to leave, I stood at the doorway, watching the rain fall outside. For months, I had been blamed, criticized, and taken for granted. Now the truth was finally impossible for anyone to ignore. And sometimes, the strongest form of revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply refusing to tolerate disrespect and allowing people to face the consequences of their own actions. As parents, Maeve and Arthur had done the hardest thing possible. They had chosen what was right, even though it hurt. After they drove away, a deep sense of peace settled over the house. It felt like the calm that comes after a powerful storm has finally passed. I sat down at the dining table and finished my dinner. It was a simple meal, but that night, it tasted like peace. Later, after the rain had stopped, I noticed someone sitting on the front porch steps. It was Chloe. Her clothes were damp, and the confidence she usually carried was gone. She sat quietly, staring at her hands. For the first time, she looked vulnerable. Julian was waiting in the car nearby, giving her the space she needed. I opened the front door and stood there silently. After a moment, Chloe spoke. "My mom was right," she said softly. I didn't interrupt. She took a deep breath. I became obsessed with controlling everything. I cared too much about looking successful and being right. Somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be kind. The night air was cool and still. I let her continue. The dinner my parents cooked. Her voice cracked. I lashed out because I was jealous. I looked at her carefully. Jealous? I asked. She nodded. You always seemed peaceful, comfortable with yourself. And instead of dealing with my own problems, I took my frustration out on everyone else. A tear rolled down her cheek. I hurt my parents. I hurt Julian. And I hurt you. I stepped outside and stood beside her. You didn't hurt me, Chloe, I said calmly. She looked up. You showed me who you were at that moment, and I responded accordingly. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she asked the question she had probably been carrying for weeks. Can you ever forgive me? I thought carefully before answering. Forgiveness takes time. She listened closely. It doesn't begin with words. It begins with actions, real change, consistent change. She nodded slowly. Then I added, go upstairs. Your husband is waiting for you. And call your parents. Today, they gave you a gift, even if it didn't feel like one. What gift? The truth. Chloe lowered her head and quietly whispered, you're right. Then she stood up and walked back inside. 3 months later, life in the house looked completely different. Julian and Chloe were still living upstairs, but now everything was official. They had signed a proper rental agreement and paid their expenses on time every month. There were no arguments, no tension, no confusion about expectations. Most importantly, there was mutual respect. Chloe had also made changes in her own life. She reduced her work hours and stopped trying to control everything around her. Instead, she focused on improving herself. Little by little, she became more patient, more thoughtful, and easier to be around. The change wasn't overnight, but it was real. One Sunday afternoon, we all gathered for dinner. Maeve and Arthur were there too. The atmosphere was completely different from that disastrous dinner months earlier. Everyone laughed, everyone talked, and no one felt like they were walking on eggshells. As we prepared the meal together, Chloe worked beside her mother in the kitchen. When dinner was ready, she carried a serving dish to the table and placed it in front of me. Then she smiled. It wasn't forced. It wasn't awkward. It was genuine. I hope you like it, Harriet, she said softly. I took a bite. The food was delicious. I smiled back at her. It's wonderful, Chloe. She looked relieved. I nodded. It tastes like hard work. Her eyes brightened. And it tastes like a fresh start. Across the table, Julian squeezed her hand. For the first time in a long time, he looked confident and at peace. He was no longer avoiding problems. He was facing them, and because of that, he seemed happier than ever. As I looked around the table, I realized something important. The house itself hadn't changed. The walls were the same. The rooms were the same. But it felt bigger somehow, warmer, lighter. The boundaries I had created hadn't pushed people away. They had protected the relationships worth keeping. And in the end, that was the real lesson. Respect grows where boundaries exist. And sometimes the strongest act of love is having the courage to say, this is where the line is. Once everyone understands that, healing can finally begin. The boundaries I had put in place didn't push people away. Instead, they created something much stronger. They built a foundation where respect, honesty, and genuine love could finally grow. As the evening came to an end and everyone prepared to leave, I stood by the dining room window for a moment. Outside, the garden was quiet. The roses swayed gently in the evening breeze. The house felt calm, peaceful, whole. Life was moving forward exactly as it should. Looking back, I realized I had never won through arguments, threats, or revenge. I had simply stood my ground. When disrespect entered my home, I responded with clear boundaries. When people crossed those boundaries, I remained consistent. I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I didn't try to control anyone. I simply refused to allow others to control me. And in the end, that made all the difference. Chloe learned that respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned. Julian learned that avoiding problems only allows them to grow. Maeve and Arthur showed that true love sometimes means holding people accountable. And I learned something too. Protecting your peace is not selfish. Setting boundaries is not cruel. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for others is to clearly define what you will and will not accept. As I watched the last of the evening light fade across the garden, I felt grateful, not because everything had been easy, but because everyone had grown. The storm had passed, the lessons had been learned, and the family that remained was stronger because of it. I smiled to myself and turned off the dining room light. Tomorrow would be another ordinary day. And after everything that had happened, ordinary felt like a gift. The house was quiet. My heart was peaceful. And for the first time in a long time, home felt exactly the way it was meant to feel.